So thank you all for being here. And for the Boomerang faculty returning to academia from industry panel. So today we have five faculty members at Brown who are here to share their insights on returning to academia or having a joint position in academia with industry. And so first I'll go over, give a brief introduction of the speakers, read their short bios, and then after that we can get started on the panel questions. So first we have Dr. David Blanding, who is the Faculty Director of the Master of Public Affairs Program and Associate Professor of Practice of International Public Affairs at the Watson Institute of International Public Affairs. Dr. Blanding received his Ph.D. in Political Science at Brown, and prior to joining Watson in 2022, Dr. Blanding worked in the U.S. Government Accountability Office as a senior methodologist and later as the Director of Leadership and Executive Development Programs in their Learning Center. He has also taught political science, policy, public policy and law at American University, McDaniel College, and Brown University. And next we have Dr. Jerome Robinson, who is a Manning Assistant Professor of Chemistry in the Department of Chemistry. And after receiving his PhD in chemistry at the University of Pennsylvania, he spent time in industry as a research chemist at Exalta Coating Systems. And Dr. Robinson joined Brown in 2016. And next we have Dr. Sardar Katioglu, who is the Group Vice President of the AI Center of Excellence at Fidelity Investments and adjunct faculty of computer science in the Department of Computer Science. And Dr. Katioglu received his PhD in computer science at Brown, and previously he led the Advanced Constraint Technology R&D group at Oracle and worked at Adobe, and he joined Brown in 2016. So next we have Dr. Ye Chi, who is the Joan Wernick Sorensen Professor of Engineering in the School of Engineering. And after receiving her PhD in Material Science from Caltech, Dr. Chi spent 12 years working at the General Motors R&D Center, and she transitioned from industry to academia in 2013 and served on the faculty in the Chemical Engineering and Material Science Department at Michigan State University until 2020 when she joined Brown. And finally, we have Dr. Vikas Shrivastava, the Howard R. M. Reisman Assistant Professor in the School of Engineering at Brown. And following his PhD in mechanical engineering from MIT, Dr. Shrivastava worked at ExxonMobil research organizations in various roles, including mechanics and marine team lead, worldwide deep water drilling coordinator, and senior technical professional advisor mechanics and materials. And he joined Brown as a tenure-track faculty in 2018. So please join me in welcoming all our speakers today. So can we just briefly, could each of you just briefly introduce yourself again with your names and current roles in industry and academia?
Sure. So David Blanding, Faculty Director of the Master of Public Affairs Program at the Watson Institute.
Jerome Robinson, currently Manning Assistant Professor in the Department of Chemistry.
Serdar Kadıoğlu, adjunct faculty in the computer science departments, and in parallel working in the AI center at Fidelity Investments.
Yue Chi, professor in engineering, also deputy director for the new initiative for sustainable energy.
Vikas Shrivastava, faculty in School of Engineering, working in mechanical engineering, mechanics, and biomedical engineering, 3 areas.
Okay, so thank you for the introductions. And I think we'll get started with the first panel question. So starting from Dr. David Blanding, can you please share with us your career trajectory? What was your motivation for returning to academia and or holding a joint academic position? And what do you enjoy most and least about academia and industry?
So many loaded questions. All right, let's start with the easy one. Journey. So I've always in my career kind of straddled the line between scholarship and practice, and I intended to do that from the very beginning. It's one of the reasons I chose Brown for the PhD program. When I was applying to doctoral programs, I had been working for a few years at the American Civil Liberties Union, which is a large nationwide civil rights organization on racial justice issues. And in the course of doing that work, I realized that I wanted to do something that only a PhD would allow me to do, which is to kind of drive knowledge making in the racial justice space. And so I came to Brown with that idea in mind. I spoke to the person who became my dissertation chair and mentor about that interest, and he didn't bat an eyelash. Some other people at some other institutions did. And so that's why I landed at Brown in large part. But subsequent to that, I sort of drove my career around cultivating both the kind of academic research skills and the non-academic skills that I think are necessary for the practice of public affairs. So I learned about project management, I learned about collaboration. I had lots of different jobs as a graduate student. I worked in the Writing Center, I worked in the Sheridan Center, I worked in the College at Brown program, and you name it, I did it. But all of that came in really handy when I ended up leaving academia after about a year and a half. So I did a postdoc after my Ph.D. At the Taubman Center for American Politics, and then went to a tenure track position at a small liberal arts college called McDaniel for about a year and a half before landing in the government role that was described in the bio, first as a senior methodologist and then subsequently as a director of leadership and executive development programs. So for me, the trajectory has always been about balancing my love of teaching and learning with a desire to do something that was really practical in the context of government. It was a no-brainer to come back to Brown in part because I really love the institution and its willingness to take people who have these unconventional trajectories, right? Brown is, as far as I can tell, not the place that expects a specific thing of you, right? It's a place that cultivates whoever you are meant to be. And that, I think, is really special about this place, and I want to be a part of cultivating that. I like, to answer the other question about what I most like about being in academia, the freedom that comes with being in a place where there is intellectual diversity and where people are allowed to and encouraged to ask big questions. I worked in a nonpartisan, non-ideological agency, which is great when you are surrounded by elected officials who are not so keen on being nonpartisan or non-ideological or fact-based or all of those other things. Because it means we get to do good work without the influences that politics can sometimes assert. But it also meant that as a person with political opinions, I needed to constrain myself a little bit. And I don't need to do that anymore. And it's nice to be in a space where I can speak a bit more freely in conjunction with my students about things that I care about. At the same time, academia, much like government, is bureaucratic, and I don't like bureaucracy anywhere at any time. I understand it, I have studied it, I have yet to learn to like it.
Thank you.
Okay,
Would
so
it be helpful to repeat the question?
no, I think I got it. So for trajectory, so when I was finishing up my PhD, what I recognized was I love research and development. I'm not sure, lots of people were like, well, are you gonna do industry or are you gonna do academics? I was like, well, why don't I look at both? I'll look at the job search. And I was like, well, I'm positive I'm gonna send out postdoc letters right around Thanksgiving, but let's try corporate recruiting and see what roles are out there, because I don't know what chemists necessarily do for research. And so had a few interviews, and in particular, I was really excited about this company, Exalta Coding Systems, because they really wanted to develop this kind of research infrastructure, and this was a totally new area for me. They're related to corrosion science and thinking about kind of heterogeneous electrochemistry. I had done something very different for my PhD, and so I said, well, if they're going to take a chance on me, it sounds like they really want to grow, let's do this. And so in terms of coming back, so one, I love research, I love mentoring, I love teaching, and so when I was in industry, I had an opportunity because I was in the greater Philadelphia area. There's lots of colleges, and so I picked up an adjunct position, basically teaching one night a week after work. And so there I didn't conflict with my professional responsibilities, and so taught a course 6 to 9 or something on Monday nights. And so I really enjoyed that. I really wanted to see kind of what other opportunities might that be. And so even though that was really great for me, I really also kind of missed the opportunity of seeing your students in different places, right? Having the folks, I had an intern for summer research, but you kind of miss those connections of where if you maybe have them in class, if you're also researching, like if you have them more than 8 weeks, right, I think you have a larger impact. And so I was looking for an opportunity to be able to do that. And the other side, I guess, on the kind of research component, for many of these teams, you have this really awesome interdisciplinary team solved, very fixated on one problem that's associated with your business. And so it's really cool, very high level science, but also like what I really appreciated about chemistry was, if we had this fundamental or kind of general concept, I could apply it in very different places. And so, so again, just kind of two very different ends. And so there was an opportunity for me to come back and think about that because I like problem solving and thinking maybe a little bit earlier on in the pipeline of development. That would be great. So, but yeah, so luckily I was hired here. But we can talk more about the search part later or something. So, but it's the short stick.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, welcome. My career trajectory is rather linear and boring, I would say. I studied computer science in Istanbul and then went on to do a Ph.D. in subfield of AI, back when AI wasn't literally everywhere. And maybe a key moment for me was I was an exchange student in Europe where I took a course that I really liked, and I stayed for a research internship that I really liked as well. So I thought, okay, on this topic, doing research really speaks to me, and that's what led me to go on to do PhD studies. After PhD, since then I've been in the high-tech software industry and worked at Adobe and Oracle. So it's more like applied sciences in the industry. And since 2016, I'm teaching a graduate level course in the computer science department. The way the connection happened was throughout my time in the industry, I always kept notes to myself about, I wish I knew this, things that I didn't know, and I learned it myself. And over time, it became to an extent that I wanted to share it with people, and that led me to give guest lectures, and one guest lecture turned into two went into 3, and all of a sudden we have an entire semester worth of material to talk about. So that's where the connection was happening for me. Most favorite part about academia, I like being here. I guess there's something that you miss when you're out of campus, just being surrounded by highly motivated people that are deeply experts in what they're doing, and just seeing them gives me energy. The least favorite part is sometimes I feel in our studies with students and other research projects, I can see multi-year involvement, some vision coming out of it, but with part-time engagement, it's difficult to devote the time that will be fair to some of these initiatives. So that is a bit of a trade-off for me. But in the industry, what I like the most is clearly the practicality and how some of this impact and value comes out of it. But it's also a double-edged sword because you have to cover all the cases. It has to be real. You cannot make simplifying assumptions, and that might sometimes be frustrating, and that's my least favorite part of the industry. So overall, that's myself.
Okay, good. So the question is trajectory.
Yes,
Right?
career
Okay,
trajectory, your motivation for returning to academia, and what you enjoy most and least about the industry.
3 questions. Good. Welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Yueqi. Again, so I think that this question probably come back to like the graduate school, because that was the decision-making time. And opposite to David's experience, I never worked in real life. So school after school after school, and I also happen to research on like atoms. So I study materials, and with a computer, both a material science degree and a computer science degree, I want to use computers to study or simulate what's inside the material. How do we design them? We start from quantum mechanics. So basically, how I view materials is very, very small, and that's actually part of the reason I feel like I want to go to a real world. So I had an intern experience in General Motors, and they also at that time they have an opening. They want to hire a modeling person, and so I basically just applied and joined them the next year. I think I liked what I saw in that like a summer. So summer intern is a good time to do that. Why I didn't go to academia? I think a part of the reason, I think it's still a problem right now, is the lack of role models of female faculty in academia. And we can see that from this panel as well. And so at that time, I was just totally freaked out and scared. I said, I mean, academia is not for me. I just don't want to. And the other way is also the postdoc. I think a postdoc position is really yield-defined because you're smart and work hard and paid low, and you have to move to another location in 3 years. Is really not fair for my family because at that time I had my first baby right when I got my Ph.D. So with all of that, the critical time where you're young, not so young, with a career and family all at the same time, so I choose to move to Michigan and have a balanced life and work. I think very, very lucky, at that year, and GM and Brown created this collaborative research lab. So we have a lot of joint projects. I was able to work with the students here and faculty here. So that collaboration is still ongoing. So now I'm on this side. I still collaborate with some colleagues at GM. And so through this 12 years in industry, I really had fun to work on many interesting materials problems, from lightweighting of vehicle to electrification of vehicle. So we're always at the forefront of the industry. I think one of these things I will talk later, enabler for the transition is publication. So I kept my publication, and so I was able to move back to academia because then this is the fun part. We talk about freedom, right? Academia, intellectual freedom. So industry, and then all my projects, I have to justify how they are related to auto industry. There are more interesting materials problems I want to study. So I think I lied to my kids to say I want academia freedom. So that's why we moved. Within a month, my son at that time was maybe 10 years old. I realized to say, "Mom, do you call working all the time as freedom?" I said, "Yeah, that's freedom to work and work very happily." I think I'm really, really grateful for my family to kind of tolerate all the long hours for faculty, and then they support that. I think the most rewarding part of course, this transition is the student. And just last week on Monday, I have a student defend his thesis. On Saturday, he drove back to Michigan and started working for General Motors and going to simulator for battery materials. I felt like, wow, this is such a rewarding time, and now I see more people growing and they get to achieve something great. So overall, it's a happy kind of transition for me. I didn't say that when I first transitioned, I went to Michigan State because the family wanted to stay in Michigan. As soon as the kids grew older, then I get free to move. I moved back to Brown. I'm really, really grateful they gave me this chance and to work with the students and with colleagues here.
Thank you, and congratulations on the student's thesis defense.
Hi everyone, I'm Vikas Shrivastava. Thank you for coming. I know it's late. My trajectory, I grew up in India. I did my bachelor's from Indian Institute of Technology. It's one of those engineering institutes that are pretty known in India. Came to US after that. Never really worked before, so came here for graduate studies. Finished my PhD in 2010 in mechanical engineering from MIT. And I had some postdoc offers. I was not sure at the time, like you were saying. I've not had been exposed to a lot of things in the world. I've studied, so I've seen certain spectrum. So I ended up taking a job offer, not taking the postdoc offer, taking a job offer at ExxonMobil. At the time in 2010, Exxon was the largest corporation, so it has its own thing going on. They were looking to really find oil in some of the most extreme environments. So you're talking about places like Arctic where you don't have access for 9 months of year, so literally developing a city underwater where people can live without access to humanity for 9 months a year kind of thing. So very exciting engineering problems to solve. So it was pretty good days. I enjoyed my time there, worked on a lot of interesting things. I did leave industry to come to Brown. I worked there for 8.5 years and then came here to Brown in 2018. So I've been here for now getting close to 6 years. So what was the, can you do my
Your motivation for returning to academia, holding a joint position, and what you enjoyed with some links about academic industry.
Right. So the motivation to come to academia, I think we have heard some of that. Number one is intellectual freedom, not having a boss. I think it's a big thing for certain people, and I think my personality suits that. And third one is working with younger, moldable people who still have a dream and passion to make a difference in their life. Versus when you work in industry, you work with a lot of professionals. A lot of people I was managing was 30 years older than me. So you can't, they know what they're doing, you can't mold them. So that passion among young population makes you bring more drive to you. So that was the reason for me to be able to come to academia. Now, one of the questions is, what is the goods and bads of industry and academia? Right? So I've seen two sides of it, at least as my perspective. I think there may be more diverse views. For me, the difference is, whenever I came, people say, oh, how do you like academia? So my answer is, which is true, what is there not to like? Is half the salary, double the work. That was the transition from the industry to academia. So financially, there is no comparison. Industry is financially much more, let's say, giving in terms of rewarding. Number two is, at least for me, it was work-life balance was very, very nice when I was working from Monday to Friday, 8 to 5. I would not even take laptop to my home kind of thing. Right? And I was on a fast track technically even beyond that. So those things are nice. But the challenges, at least my view, is that you can apply to broad industry, that there is an element of application, right? You have to solve problems that are applied. So you get to work on interesting problems, but in some sense, if you're really doing the technical work, you're not the decision maker. The managers are the ones who are going to make the decision what problem you work on. So if you're really smart, you have those leadership, you can convince them every year that, oh, let me work on what I like. But nonetheless, the decision is made by certain leaders. So what happens that I progress my career, I was moved more on the leadership management role. So if you want to be able to make the decision, you need to be on those leadership roles, managers. If you go to those roles, you don't have time to do the technical work. So you have to make this fine balance. You give up technical work to make the decision, but then you don't get to enjoy that. If you want to do the work, somebody can come and tell you what to work on. So those are some of the negatives, in spite of all the positives that I felt was bringing to academia. Academia, I mean, I told you a lot of great things about, like students, intellectual freedom, having no boss, really work on more fundamental problems important. The challenges are the freedom, right, and having no boss are really nice things, but those are also a challenge because not having a boss, the buck stop at us, right? I am the decision maker, I am the final call, so everything, you're responsible for everything. So that means you have a lot more responsibility, lot more work, lot more decision you have to make and be responsible for. We have the freedom to, I mean, after my lecture, I can disappear and go to Hawaii and do whatever. Nobody's asking me a question, I don't have a boss. But that means there's no black and white lines between work and home. So because we have work responsibility, we can do any time we want, nobody's monitoring it. I can, for me, Monday to Friday or Saturday, Sunday, I don't feel indifferent. So I mean, you can look at the positive, but it can also have some negative consequence because, having that, sometimes drawing the boundary actually helps you more to separate out things. So I mean, this has been my experience.
Thank you. So thank you for all sharing your experiences. I think we'll jump straight into the second group question. So our panelists hold different types of faculty positions on different academic tracks. So can you please describe the role and responsibilities of the academic position you currently hold? And how has your non-academic experience influenced your research, teaching, and mentoring? I think we can start with.
So I hold both an administrative role as faculty director and a non-tenure stream faculty role as an associate professor of the practice. In the former capacity, I'm really making a lot of leadership decisions. So I have to articulate a vision for the program. I worked with the program actually to create a mission statement recently. We're working toward a strategic plan. Some of you may be aware that the Watson Institute was recently approved to establish a school, so there's going to be quite a significant organizational change process underway, and I'm sure I'll be very involved in that with respect to my particular program. As a faculty member, my role is primarily teaching, which is kind of nice because it means I don't have the same pressures, if you will, to do research that folks who are on the tenure track have. And yet there's nothing stopping me from doing research. In fact, I'm in touch with the publisher right now about the possibility of publishing a book. So there's that freedom that comes with it without the pressure of it, and I get to do the thing that I do enjoy quite a bit, which is teaching. Balancing those two is quite a lot, but it is nevertheless a labor of love, and I get to bring the creativity that would otherwise exist in research into both of these other arenas as well, and I get to exercise a bit of leadership, right? It's a special role to be able to articulate and pursue a vision for an organization, especially one that's undergoing the kind of change that Watson is about to, to be potentially the very first person who leads this program when this thing launches as a school, unless they fire me before then, which is the downside of not having tenure, I guess. But let's get out on video so we can experience that. It's really the idea that I could be part of this really major transformation is really alluring to me. It's what I enjoyed about working in government as well. And so I'm excited about that prospect as well. But I also get to spend a great deal of my time teaching and molding the next generation of great global leaders, which is fantastic. Like the idea that, when I retire from this job, if all goes according to plan, maybe the Secretary General of the United Nations is a Brown alum, or the President of the United States or Governor of Rhode Island, right, can say they got their training under me at Brown University. That would be a phenomenal outcome.
Thank you.
Okay. So I'm a tenure track faculty member in the Department of Chemistry. In terms of like how my time in industry shaped me, or like where that kind of what helped. So the time that I spent there was almost as long as a postdoc, kind of. So there for a couple of years. My independent research has nothing to do with what I did in industry, but I think that time in industry certainly shaped the way that I think about research problems. And so I also thought a lot about how there might be increased interfaces kind of between fundamental academic research and research in industry. In particular, thinking about where do you make that transition, or where can you make those partnerships that could strengthen both, right? Because you're like, on the flip side, you might say, oh, well, they'll just give me money to do these things. You're like, or if I just publish this paper, somebody will be so cool that people will just pick up on it. You're like, no way, right? Like there's still so much optimization that actually has to be done in there. Like there has to be a strong business case, and you have to think about where that actually kind of comes in, right? Because it's not like companies have, oh yeah, I've got $150,000 a year. I'll just give you just so you do your own research, and that'll benefit our company. How? So thinking about those pieces is really good. Another thing that, away from kind of the technical aspect, I thought it really helped me thinking about mentoring kind of more globally, right? Is that actually in industry, I think there's much more structure in terms of what do you think about professional development for people at different stages? And so do you have, now I think it's more mainstream, but thinking about individual development plans, what are you doing for regular goal setting? What kind of steps are you taking for these things, right? And so making sure that you kind of set that right there, because as an advisor for Ph.D. students, right, like each group is their own small company, and so how you build that culture, how do you train those students, and also kind of set those norms. And so that has been immensely rewarding, and also thinking about how you can change that for the department and even kind of across the university for those. So it's been a lot of fun.
So on my side, as an adjunct faculty in the computer science department, my primary responsibility is to teach. I'm teaching a graduate level course, but there are lots of brave undergrads who also take it and do excellently well. Along with it, we also have independent research study courses, so I can get to do a bit of research projects with students. But again, this is time bound to a semester that may not be, necessarily always have a closure right in the moment. I'm also involved in graduation projects, capstone projects. That gives me a nice opportunity to work with students. And also maybe some co-advising opportunities when there are connections between joint projects with other faculty members, including inter-department collaboration. So that's roughly it. A little bit independent of the position, but I still think of it in the academic sense. Community service in terms of chairing and program committee membership in research venues, that's also part of, I think, the academic life. How it affected me, the industry experience in teaching. First of all, a lot of industry use cases, real life use cases in our course development. So you actually get to see the algorithm in textbook definition, which I present, and then I say, okay, forget about this one. This is how you would do it if they ask you next time you at your job. And I think there's a lot of learning opportunities there. As an example, all our projects are coming from industrial benchmarks, from real world use cases. I think it gives a lot of pleasure to students to actually say that, I have the best solution to this industry problem. Maybe it's a little outdated right now. It's not the state of the art, but still it was a real use case. If you had done it 6 years ago, you would be the best on that competition benchmark. So I think there's a good amount of rewarding experience there. In terms of research, I think seeing industry and motivated by applied science in practice gives you a keen eye on applicability and impact. And it also allows me to identify pain points, where I think comes a lot of impact and innovation. So in my mind, it's not really a separation between industry versus academia, but a bit more of a DNA helix where some of the practical problems actually lead to very interesting research problems that maybe as a pure researcher you wouldn't necessarily see that it exists, and vice versa. And in terms of mentoring, I think you quickly realize in industry that there's no one career path that people are interested, and you get to understand that there's no one way of mentoring that works for everyone on your team, and you get to talk to a lot of different people with diverse backgrounds, especially non-technical people, and I think a lot of that experience helped me in terms of my communication with students in class and outside of class.
Thank you.
So I'm currently a tenured professor in engineering. So I think a lot of people have this mystery about what is tenure mean. And I happened to sit in a panel like this for NSF, and then they ask us what do you mean by what's after tenure? I said, why we talk about this when we were in industry? We never had tenure. We can be fired every day. Do you think we just stop coming to work? So the answer is no, right? So you got to work on the interesting problems you want to work on, and the rest is just the title change. So I think in typical professor in engineer, probably true in all STEM, right? Typically the offer letter will say your 60% of duty is doing research, 20 or 30% is doing teaching, and the rest of 50% doing service. But it add up together larger than 100% of your time. So that's true. So research is the primary goal. Right? I think, and how do you be strategize about that? What type of an expert you want to be in? What field you want to lead? The students, I always view the students, so industry, I was in auto industry, of course, cars are our products. In academia, students are our products. So we want to train independent researchers after they get a Ph.D. And then that means the researcher is the method we use to train them to do research. The projects and the funding is the means to do the research. So it's not the other way around. We chase the funding to do research. No, we chase the research. We use the research to train our students. But the funding is necessary to support that research and support our students. Because the engineering typically will have to support our students and postdocs. So that costs a lot. We spend a lot of time doing that. Teaching, I think, in generally, Brown is very generous. So we teach one course for a graduate course and one undergraduate course. I think So for I think teaching is a co-learning process. We learn with the students, and I always like to update the course with what's new currently in the field. So I enjoy that process. So for faculty, you also have to serve the community, like in the university, outside the university, and research community. So that's pretty much like add up to more than 100% of the time.
Thank you.
I think some of this will sound like repetition what you said. The only difference is you is tenured, I still have to go through my tenure, so that's why
It's just the
almost there. Yeah. But so as a tenure track, I mean, I think I don't know the audience here, but there's a broad audience. You may have realized that universities have a lot of different positions, right? I mean, from professor of practice to affiliates to visiting professors to administrations, a lot of deans have privilege. And tenured faculty is one set where we belong. So I can only speak for tenured track faculty. So like you said, I think the emphasis here is research and research impact. So that our expectation is that our roles are divided into three broader classifications: service, teaching, research. Research is supposed to dominate between 65 to 70% of our time should go in research, 70%. The remaining 30% gets split in teaching and service. Services, you're part of committee, administration, service to university committees or external scientific committees. So it kind of spread together. So whatever time you spend, 150%, 70% or 60% of that needs to go in research. That's our driving force. We are being assessed based on that. So I mean that pretty much defines what a tenure track faculty is. Now again I can speak for what I feel was important that I learned. So I gained a lot of things from industry that I brought back here. But maybe there are opportunities to learn the same things elsewhere. So the things that are crucial to be successful in industry, especially larger corporations, even for maybe startups, that being able to work in teams, being able to identify the critical problems that you have to solve, right? Being cut through the noise and tackle the important things, because you can't tackle everything, but being able to identify what are the most important things to solve, where your time and energy should go. And number three is communication skills, absolutely necessary. That whether it's scientific work, working with the teams, technical work, writing proposals or presenting your science, how you communicate and how you get feedback from people, let people give you feedback, that's very important. Those are the skills that are absolutely necessary in industry. I was able to bring some of that skills set back. At least when I started, even though for me it was a big transition, leaving something different, starting something, building a lab from scratch, I think the ABL I was able to run pretty fast because some of the stuff that I had learned in industry, which I'm not saying that you cannot learn elsewhere as a postdoc too, but those elements. So I was able to hire good students. I being able to identify when we work through a lot. In the startup, as a tenure track faculty, they give you a startup. So in a way, that money you can use to define your own problems, right? Later on, you have to write your own proposal, get the grants. You kind of already thought about the problem. So when you have a whole array of, the world is an open place for you, how do you define the important problems? So some of those elements of, filtering through the importance to figure out where my skill set versus what the impact looks like, and being able to work through it quickly was something that I thought, at least I felt like I gained a lot from industry. So critical thinking, working in teams, managing teams, so the leadership, but most importantly communication, whether it's scientific communication. So I think, and that helps us being able to mentor the students, talk to students, make sure that you're always guiding them, and when you do research, you're trying to solve something that has not been solved before. It's an unknown problem. If you know the answer, then it's not really research. You're creating new knowledge. Then you'll always get unexpected results as you move along. But should not be a surprise. I think if you work in real life, you see that you come across a lot of unexpected things. You still have to move forward, still have to solve it. Same as research, that you come across new thing, you make a decision, give a guidance, move forward. Doesn't work, next time. See, some of the things I thought was I got gained from being out in industry for 8 years. But I think it could be gained from other experiences also.
Thank you. And now for our final set of questions. So how difficult or easy was it to return to academia from industry? And what is your advice for students still deciding on whether to pursue academia or industry, or both?
For me, it was not difficult to transition. I take that back. Psychologically, it was easy because I do love Brown, and it was, if I were returning to another institution, it might have felt different. But this was really a no-brainer for me. Logistically, it's a bit more complicated. Moving to another state, I'm sort of living in two places now. I spend part of my time in Rhode Island and part of my time in Maryland. That's because I have a daughter, so balancing work and life is important. So I do get back to Maryland pretty frequently. And so the logistics of that are more complex than I would like. But I think that is really the major thing you have to think about if you're deciding whether you want to be in industry or academia, right there. As everyone I think here has said, there are major trade-offs, and ultimately your job is a part of your life, not the other way around. And so there are going to be all of these other variables that intervene, right? Your partners, your spouses, your children, your friends, and where you feel most comfortable, the flexibility that the job affords you, right? There are some ways in which academia is maximum work-life balance because, at least for me as a social scientist, I don't have to be in a building or a lab to do my work. I can be working from home or I can be working here. And I can be in any place to get the work done that I need to get done. And I don't have to be on campus, right? That means, when my daughter has an event at school in the middle of the day, I could go in the middle of the day. And I don't know that I could have done that if I had the rigid, even the conservative kind of 9 to 5 schedule that you have in government, right? You're not necessarily working 12 to 15 hours a day. I still had to be somewhere at a specific time, and that leaves less time to do other things. This job affords me a bit more flexibility. But to answer the question directly, why choose them? I think the question is really why not do both? If you're even here thinking about both of these, it's because you see some potential benefit in both of them. And I think if nothing else, the takeaway from all of us here should be there doesn't need to be a choice, right? It's a false dichotomy that people will lead you to believe exists, that you can't do both, that once you're an academic, you can't go into industry, your skills won't translate or what have you, and nothing could be further from the truth. And conversely, that once you get into industry that you can't make it back here, people won't respect you or your work won't translate. And I think that's just not true, and I think we're proof of it. It may be rare, and there may certainly be some folks who are doctrinaire and believe you should stay in one place or the other, right? You should make a choice, but I don't think you have to. And I think coming out of this place, in particular, Brown University, we tend to push boundaries and we tend to blur the lines. And so continue to do that here and everywhere else in your life. And don't let people force you into making a choice. If you really feel compelled to do both, do both. Those are the people who change the world and influence students and change perhaps university cultures, right? We're here because we're offering something by virtue of having been in industry that perhaps those folks who've only spent their careers in academia are not able to offer to you all, to students. And conversely, we're offering something that those folks who didn't have a chance to be in academia and spend that time really devoting effort in a dedicated way to a subject don't have if they're in perhaps industry or in government like I was. And so I sort of see myself as sort of bicultural or bilingual in a way, right? And I consider that an advantage, not a disadvantage. And I don't see myself as having to choose between them, but as really having to decide when I want to be in which place. And as far as I'm concerned, my career may take me back to industry if I see fit, or I could be happy here for the rest of my life. But it's up to me. And I think for the same reason, it's up to you all to decide not whether you want to be in one place or the other, but when you want to be in any particular place. Because I don't think over the course of this long life that you'll hopefully have, that you really do have just these two choices, or you have to just be one or the other.
Thank you.
Well, that was awesome. So I agree with a lot of things that David said, especially I think, right, we're all masters of our own destiny, right? I mean, in particular, if you're going for your master's or your PhD, right, like you are generating new pieces of information. And so, and the positions that you hold, whether it's in industry or academics or anywhere, right, like you're going to be leading people, you're going to be leading teams. And so for me, again, what I always found frustrating was that, oh, are you going to do industry or academics or government? Like, really it's okay, where do you want to be on the chemistry side? Do you want to be at the bench thinking about the technical? Do you want to eventually kind of take more steps away and be leading people / taking certain directions, or do you want to pivot? And so I think regardless where you want to be, whatever job you want to get, right, like you're building your qualifications for it. And so it's not like you just instantly switch or you do these things, right? Like maybe you have a stellar CV or resume for any job, right? But like probably not, right? Like you're specializing in certain things. And so depending on where you want to go, you probably want to build credibility for the direction that you want to go. And so I think thinking about ways to keep your foot in the door and keep on having that experience. And so as a PhD student, if there's opportunities to do internships, for example, right? Like you can have some opportunity to, one, get experiences, both to see is this something that I would like, but also that you have some experience there. And vice versa, if you do find yourself in an industry position afterwards, adjunct positions can be an excellent opportunity to get teaching experience, maybe to find partnerships within those departments, right? Because many of these roles may not be always so defined, right? There's room to expand potentially. And so maybe, you're getting paid to teach a course, but maybe you have opportunities to do research in those places or find collaborations. And in almost every place, networking can be very important. And so it's not that somebody then gives you a job, but maybe you have the information of knowing what does this position even look like, or what are the kind of really qualified candidates that are in those positions. And so then you can then try to carve out those pieces. So I don't think anything is ever irreversible, and I think you're in control. It just depends on where and how you want to go. So I'm really excited to talk to people afterwards too.
Great, thank you. I get to spend 4 days at work full time, and I get to be here on 1 day a week in the campus, and that's what I found to work best for me. So that's a little bit up to you to define what that looks like for you. And I cannot imagine myself like doing either or full time, in the sense that I would miss the fast-paced setup of the industry, but at the same time I would miss the energy of the campus and the deep expertise that you can have around. But I'll just mention one thing. For me the transition was very easy, but there's a caveat to it. The caveat is you have to be intentional about it. So when I left my PhD and went to industry full time, nothing forced me to keep these notes. And each time I saw something that is, okay, this is super interesting and people need to know about this. Or I get to, publish still as if I'm in academia. And while, there was support for it, there was no incentive for it. So that was like an extra work that you would do, which you wouldn't otherwise, unless you really like what you do. So the transition is easy because you have put in the work and the effort already into it. And at the time, it's not necessarily obvious what is that going to be good for eventually, but that's not why you do it in any case. So in that sense, academia in my mind is almost a mindset. It's not an affiliation. If I have the affiliation today or not, I think I'll remain a scientist at heart, and I'll consider myself in academia because you get to put that effort in any case. Maybe, as one comment, as not an advice, but if I may add one thing, you can start small maybe to get a sense of it. Like, I gave a guest lecture that turned into another guest lecture. So it doesn't have to be either or in one day, but maybe there are opportunities, and that comes with maintaining your relationships and networks and being intentional about it, I guess my maybe takeaway.
Yeah, good, thank you. It's intentional, I think, is a key word. I totally agree with that. I think as some of these tenure track faculty positions, they value research a lot. So whether you can keep the publication actually really determines what's your entry or re-entry point to academia from industry. So I think I was lucky enough to keep my publications in industry. So when I left industry, I took my colleague who was more senior than me, 15 years senior than me, working in another industry. When I joined the GM, he gave me this advice: keep your publications. So I said, thank you so much. I have to treat you for a nice lunch or dinner for that advice. And he said, well, I gave everyone this advice. You happen to listen. So we're here to giving advices. Advice is cheap. Like you don't have to. You can pick and choose whatever suits for you. But I think I was really lucky to keep my publications, and that made like all this transition easier. And so I was never left academia in a way. So for some narrow-minded institute may view industry experience as negative for like the forefront research, and I don't view that. I think the fact is it's not that either. So we still, many of our engineering faculties do have like some experience from industry that give us a different perspective than like people just going from just staying within the academia track. So I think the opportunity to see both worlds is really valuable.
Yeah, and I think you've heard all the important points with everyone pointed out. That intentional was very important word. I mean, brought up before. I'll also add maybe a little bit from the sideline and so stepping back. If you look at the general population, there is definitely industry world and academia. There is significant differences between those two worlds, right? So there are people who just love being in industry. I've been with those people. They would not even touch come close to academia. The people that love being in academia. Most of people they don't want to go anything with that. So if you're on that camp, it's perfectly fine, right? It's nice actually if you're able to do both. I mean, I feel if you are able to go see industry for a few years, come back at academia, I think your vision is, but not everyone has to do that. It's the society, for every 5 of us, there are 50,000 people who are one camp or other. Remember that. Right? We happen to be in the big society where minorities, there are people very separated. So if you happen to be one camp or the other, it's perfectly fine. Because those are two different worlds, and some people have very strong inclination for that. The fact you're here, I have a feeling you're kind of a little bit confused. So, rightly so, thinking about both. Because people are in industry, they say, why do you want to hear faculty anyway? So, so it's okay to be separate, but of course it's okay. If you have the chance to go do both, I think it's amazing experience. Like I said, both have their own pros and cons, and you heard that. If for tenure track faculty, I've been actually in every possible thing, you have to be intentional, you have to find ways to connect. Right? Tenure track faculty, that intentional stuff is research because our focus on the research side. So I'll put a caution with that, because if you're going for tenure track faculty, and you have mentioned that, the evaluation criteria to hire and to get tenure, they are not going to buzz on that. PhD graduation, publications, proposals, they are looking at all that stuff will not show up in the metric. So be conscious. If you're out in industry, you want to come back, it's kind of, if you are out for 2-3 years, it's much easier to come back. Longer you are, the more diminishing returns you are getting, right? So for tenure track faculty, as long as you remember the metric is there, of course, there also it depends on the universities. MIT, for example, is more technology engineering oriented schools. They're more open to more practical research, fundamental and not. Brown is an Ivy. You may find a small percentage of faculty, they are very, very strict about that. They will not perceive anything that is what they not define. So they have lived in a university environment. For them, all that stuff is a waste. They are not going to buzz that. So there's a reality around it, depending on what institute you're going. But I feel like, if you're out there for a few years and come back at tenure track faculty, I think you'll do very well. Yeah. So but you have to plan for the publication as you go.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing your insights. So those are all for the panel questions that we have. And I wanted to open it up to the audience to see if anyone wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing very, very important information to us. Yeah, we really appreciate that. I'm curious about when you go in industry, you're saying you continue publishing and so forth. I wonder who pays for the publications, and how is that how does this funding happen if you're working a full-time job and you want to maintain that record? Because to my understanding, publishing is not free. So how is it facilitated over a long period of time?
So I will pick that because I publish a lot papers during my industry, 12 years in industry. And at that time, GM R&D as like a leader, actually he's a Brown alum at the top. His view is publication is a quality check for industry research. So he encouraged the publications, encouraged collaborations with academia. So I think I was just like really fortunate to live in that environment. I also have senior role models who publish. So typically, industry will pay, the company will pay. They paid our projects, and then the publication fee at that time was not so crazy. But now with the open public, open access, I found that somehow the publication fee just increased so much. Yeah. But nowadays you have PDF files, so even you don't publish as good journals, then you still get access to read by people. I think the publication fee is really small. It's the project. If you're going to do projects, you're going to make some samples. Computational probably is cheap, but for experiments, that's the big investment. More valuable is your time. You decide that the fact that you work on this, not that. That's a huge investment.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Let me add one thing to that. So I think most people, like you said, the publication charges are not that critical at all. But really finding a job that supports publication is really the big deal, because not every job will support that. I know that I was in a place where all the important stuff we did was proprietary to the company. We couldn't publish it. So I think that's one crucial thing. Once they allow you to publish, they will pay. For them it's small chunky, but it's mostly free. Right? So,
Thank you. Yeah, I think he's answered my follow-up.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, so I have a question about doing an industry internship during your PhD. For those of you who did that, at what point in your PhD did you do your internship? And then did you have to negotiate that with your dissertation advisor, or were they generally open to that? If you could talk about that, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Oh,
I can maybe add a word.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I took an internship on the third year of my PhD, third summer of my PhD, and I thought it was a good time, although I don't have any counterfactual to compare, because I was a bit senior into my thesis, so it didn't felt like I'm leaving some work that I must be doing and do something else instead. And it was critical in the sense that the internship itself, the group and the work was not necessarily relevant, but I noticed that, as a PhD with some seniority, you can make a difference in areas even you are not immediately tied to, so that was nice to see. But also I really enjoyed the industry pace. Like I noticed, this is maybe more from a computer science perspective, but I realized there's an entire world of industry best practices and real profession out there on how to get things done and how software should be built, and I realized I don't know that. And I was like, I cannot probably teach anything like this to anyone unless I can see myself. So that made me to consider seriously a setup in the industry where it is supported to do research, not necessarily incentivized, but at least supported. But at the same time, it's done in a way that it carries over the industry strength. So it was very influential for me to do that internship, even though the internship itself was not relevant to my thesis.
And your advisor was okay with that?
In the third year, yes. He wouldn't be okay with it in the,
Yeah.
So I did my internship, so I'm very open to that. When my students ask for internship, I typically have this conversation at the very beginning with them. I say, what's your direction, which direction you want to go? I even had a student want to go to industry. I helped to call my friends in the company said hire him to be an intern. I think whatever good, best for the student, you should get the support. Yeah. It's about the student, not because about the professor. Right? They already have a job.
Let me add a few things to this. I've not done internship myself as a PhD student, but I've hired when I was working for ExxonMobil, a lot of interns from the schools for PhD. And my own student as advisor has done internship. So what some of the observation I had is, I had an internship offer when I did my PhD. So at that thing, it depends on the advisor. I was afraid to ask my advisor. They had offered like a week before I told the company I'm not coming because I had 3 months to ask my advisor. I know his answer is going to be no. So most advisors are very supportive. So just happy to, I think I would expect to have that conversation with your advisor. So if you're planning to go in academia and postdoc, you can do internship anytime. But if you're planning to do one internship, which I think a lot of advisors are okay with that, more than one, maybe they may raise the question. When we are hiring people, just keep in mind, if you're trying to want to make internship as a mean to get a job in possibly in that company, the most optimum time the summer before the graduation, because we kind of, as an intern, our goal was, we're not looking to get work done from intern. We're trying to see are there bright candidates that we can give an offer. So if we don't have too much gap, we prefer to get somebody who are closer to graduation, because then we can, right after the internship, we can give them offer. So depending upon what your criteria is. But definitely, I think 80-90% advisors are very supportive, like you were saying. But nonetheless, I knew my case was a little challenging. To ask, I didn't ask, maybe you should have said yes.
Thank you.
So I do want to chime in and offer what might be a slightly different perspective on how this might work in the social sciences and humanities, because I have a social science doctorate. I think for us, we would have been supported had we done that. I did not do an internship myself. I did do, as I mentioned, lots of jobs. I worked all over campus, and not everyone was thrilled about that, but not everyone had my bills to pay. So and some of you may not be aware of this, but the wonderful union wage that you all earn as graduate students now is not the wage that we earned when I was a graduate student here. So kudos to you all for the work that you've done, but it was not a livable wage for us. It was a very different environment. And so I don't know what I would have done if someone would have said, you can't take some other money earning job. I would have. And at the same time, I think it can be a valuable experience. I know that when I was at GAO, particularly when I was a methodologist, we did hire PhD students as paid interns, and we hired them during the fall, spring, and summer. And so I could imagine a world, particularly for people who are in other programs, not Brown, where they're not getting summer funding, for example, and they do have to look out for resources where they would not only be supported, but encouraging you to do that, especially if it's going to help you continue to cultivate the skills and perhaps the knowledge base that you're already trying to within your program. So I would imagine that if you can make the case that it's connected to and going to support your work, they would support that. I think the risk, the fear that the institution has or your advisor might have is that it might take you away from them, right?
Yeah.
That it'll distract you from doing the work that's going to lead to timely completion of the degree, or you'll actually like it so much that you end up leaving them and not becoming a clone that they want you to be. And that's the fear. But if you can convince them that you'll still be on their team afterward and you're going to continue to get your work done on time, then I suspect that a lot of people would indeed be supportive. So my advice would be, make the case that this is part of a coherent plan, and that you're going to remain on track. And if you can make that case concrete with the deadlines, the deliverables, the goals, all of those things, I think you'll be able to convince the folks, even if they are initially skeptical.
Yeah, question?
Sure.
Thank you so much for sharing those valuable experiences. Could you please talk something like what is anxiety or pressure you face on each side, academia side or the industry side? What is the difference? The anxiety is different. What makes you super frustrated in each side? A little bit side question. Sorry.
So I guess one thing on both sides. So talking about work-life balance, right? That's something I think that you have to control either way, right? So although you can say, oh, I've only got 9 to 5 or whatever on industry, right? Most of these are salary positions. So you choose to work as much as you want. I can't imagine anybody in leadership roles necessarily, there are many demands and many easy ways to take lots more time beyond that. And so I think on both sides, I think finding where you're going to devote your time, I think, can be challenging for sure. Because I know I don't know, slow creep. Because even when I was working in industry, like, well, I just come in a little bit early, I'll do these things. And I think with research, things go wrong, right? It takes a little bit more time. Like, well, okay, shoot. Eventually, you have to reset. What gives me anxiety? I mean, it becomes more and more expensive to pay the students that work with you, and there are less opportunities. So funding is always makes you a little bit anxious, mainly because it's not the way I run my lab is not the way I run my own personal finances, right? It's just a very different business model, and so I'm relatively fiscally conservative and make sure that I have savings here, and that's what I do with my group as much as I can. But like, it's just a slightly different piece. So that's the thing that always makes me the most uncomfortable, because I have less control over some of those things. So
I'd say for me, what was frustrating about government was the resistance to change. There was a lot of resistance to change. And I understand that fundamentally. As I said, as someone who studies bureaucracies, we get that as political scientists, that in large institutions with hierarchies and roles disaggregated and fragmented, things are going to be slow. But if you are the kind of person who really relishes change and innovation, that can be incredibly frustrating. But I think there's a way to navigate that, and I think there are ways to make peace with that. I think in academia, I can take more risks, and I think I welcome that. On the other hand, there are ways in which even a place like Brown can feel conservative at times, in the sense that people like what they like. They're confident that what they're doing is the best thing. The difference between academia and government is they may actually have tested it out, and so they know it's the best thing, or at least the best thing right now. So there's some basis for it, but it can still be frustrating to find that people are really wedded to the way we've always done things, right? So when you propose a new idea, when you offer a suggestion as well, this is not how we do that here. Or this is the way we've always done it. And that trope is surprisingly common across fields. People who have been around a long time will just insist that their way is the right way, and not be as open as they ought to be. So that can be frustrating. There's no doubt about that. I think what, on the other hand, I embrace about government that I think is less possible, although not impossible in academia, especially at a place like Brown, is the ability to cross disciplinary boundaries and cross intellectual boundaries. I actually did not publish academic research when I was in government, and part of the reason relates to something you said, which is that the stuff that we publish is really the property of the government. So I had a bunch of stuff that I created similar to you, I had notes and guidelines, because I would use them to guide conversations with my colleagues and make work more efficient and all of those sort of things. Those all had to be left in the office. So now I'm here trying to recreate those things from memory, and it's not easy, but I couldn't take those with me. But I love that I could collaborate in government. And when I was in academic, one of the things that really stood out to me the first year that I was in government was just the volume of work that I was able to produce. So I had, the year before I went to GAO, I was in, small liberal arts college, and I had published like 3 things in that one year. And I remember being really proud of myself, because I was in a teaching position, so I wasn't required to do research. And I was doing it on my own. And I was at a small liberal arts college. So think, just to illustrate what the difference is, I went to them the first day and I was like, where can I find the software that I can download? And they were like, oh, it's on your computer. It's Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel. And I was like, what? And I was like, no, you don't have a website where, you know how you have at Brown, there's a web page where you can download all the software we have access to? That doesn't exist at every university. Surprise! So when you go somewhere else, that's what they mean when they say, oh, this is not quite like Brown. I didn't get that when I first went there until I had that conversation. But the point is, even with that, I felt like I was doing something that was really productive. When I went to GAO that first year that I was there, even though I wasn't even leading projects, I contributed to, and I mean named contributor, to 8 reports that were published in that year alone. And that was phenomenal to me. Like, just the mere fact that I was able to work with those people, it revealed to me that my expertise was able to build something that was greater than the sum of its parts by bringing all of these specialists together, right? Someone who is purely focused on methods like I was, along with the lawyer who is purely focused on legal issues, along with the policy expert who knew all about the agency and the dynamics of that, and the congressional relations person. We were able to produce, exponentially more than I could do in 1 year alone in that solitary world. And so I think what sometimes frustrates me or can be frustrating about academia is that it's so solitary and it's so siloed, and people don't interact with each other, they don't talk as much, they don't share information, and we don't build things that reflect sometimes the collective knowledge and wisdom that we've acquired. And I relish the opportunities to do that. But I'm also happy, and UA knows this because we're working on something right now, but that you can find institutions where you can do that. And so if that is important to you, I would encourage you to do it because it's really fulfilling. I feel like I accomplished a substantial amount in the 7 years I worked in government, even though it felt like just it blew by, but I felt like I accomplished a substantial amount because I was working in concert with other people and I had my piece and they had their piece.
Thank you. So thank you all again. Thank you for the speakers. Thank you all for coming.